Waiting. It's not something we're very used to these days, is it? Our culture has become very much about not waiting for things. Fast food, next day deliveries, buy now, pay later deals, and thanks to the internet, access to pretty much whatever we want, whenever we want it. Waiting seems to be becoming a thing of the past. But there are some things that no amount of progress will help speed up. There are some things in life that we must still wait patiently for. The birth of a child is one example. And when I say this, I don't just mean waiting the 9 months of pregnancy. A great many parents have had to wait much longer than that. The journey to reach that point of conception, let alone childbirth, has been long and slow and difficult for so many. It's often far longer than just 9 months and can seem to be made longer still by the fact that that child that they are waiting for is so longed for and so wanted. Have you ever waited for something? Waited for a really long time for something you were really excited about, something you really wanted? Have you ever waited so long and so hard for something that you almost missed it when it arrived? Perhaps the anticipation had led to impossible fantasies so that the real thing almost slipped under your radar. Or perhaps you waited for so long that your attention drifted just at the moment you needed to be alert. Simeon was waiting for the Messiah. We don't know how long he had been waiting. The Bible tells us that the Holy Spirit promised it would happen before he died. So we know he was an old man. His song in our Gospel reading today sounds like the song of someone who had been waiting a long time. Someone who'd been filled with anticipation and is now filled with long-awaited joy as he takes the infant Jesus into his arms and knows him to be the one he has been waiting for. I wonder how Simeon recognised the Messiah in the baby Jesus. He must have seen lots of babies, each at 40 days old, tiny and wrinkly, carried into the temple by insignificant but devout mothers and fathers. Was he even looking for the Messiah in a baby? Wasn't he imagining something a bit more exciting? A great teacher? A charismatic rebel? Wasn't he getting rather fed up after waiting for such a long time? Is it perhaps a lesson to us that in Simeon we see a man who did not let his fantasies or his boredom distract him from where God was to be found? I wonder how many of God's promises we don't see fulfilled, simply because we aren't paying attention, or because we don't have eyes and hearts like Simeon's, prepared to see God at work in unexpected places. I wonder how often we fail to recognise that God is at work in our lives, because actually we're more comfortable in the waiting than in the uncertainty of what will happen next when we acknowledge and respond to this. According to the tradition of this day of Candlemas, it's the day that ends Christmas and the Christmas and Epiphany season. And it's the day when all our crib scenes should be taken down, because today is about halfway between Christmas and Good Friday. It's halfway between Jesus' birth and Jesus' death. So today is a kind of pivot point point for the year, the day when we turn from cradle to cross, from birth to death. And it is Simeon's story that contains this pivot. Holding the infant Messiah, Simeon knows his wait is over. God's promise to him has been fulfilled. He praises God and sings of light and glory. And then Simeon turns to Mary, and his tone changes. This child is destined for the falling and the rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be opposed, so that the inner thoughts of many will be revealed, and a sword will pierce your own soul too. I wonder if there wasn't a part of Simeon that would have preferred to keep on waiting, to hold on to the scene of hopeful anticipation rather than these more complex and difficult emotions after the arrival of the Messiah. But following Jesus is not just about Christmas, not just about light and joy and celebration. Today we allow Simeon to turn us in the direction of the cross, remembering that following Jesus is also about sacrifice and faithfulness in the face of suffering. Perhaps this is why Candlemas is the day in which candles are blessed and marked as signs of the light of Christ in the world. We know we still have need of such signs to get us through the darkness ahead. Candlemas also happens to be roughly halfway between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. It's the point at which we begin to turn from the cold and dark of winter towards the promise of spring. Old wisdom tells us that the weather on Candlemas predicts the season to come. It was this that led to the American tradition of Groundhog Day. Some Germans decided that they would select an animal, the hedgehog, to help them predict the weather. And when a group of them emigrated to America, they found that hedgehogs were hard to come by, and this was when they turned to the more readily available groundhog. At this point, some of you may be recalling the 1993 film Groundhog Day, starring Bill Murray. Anyone else? In it, he plays Phil Connors, a self-absorbed TV weatherman caught in a time loop. He's sent out to cover the annual emergence of this meteorological rodent that predicts whether there will be an early spring or 6 more weeks of winter, and ends up having to relive that same day over and over again. And as he does, he gradually learns the golden rule of thinking about others instead of just himself. He's given the gift of having to repeat the same day over and over until he discovers his purpose. The time loop may be supernatural, but I think it serves as a metaphor for typical life. Many people can relate to Phil's predicament. They feel trapped in the routine of jobs they don't particularly like. They have trouble connecting with others on a deep level. They function okay on the surface, but underneath, they're profoundly unhappy. And Phil gains knowledge from each passing day, but to everyone else, it's as if the previous day never happened. At first, he deals with his boredom and his angst in hedonistic ways, eating and drinking and smoking too much, assuming that he must be immortal. But soon, he sets his sights on the object of his affection, his producer, Rita, played by Andy McDowell. But It's lust that drives him, not pure love. He feigns interest in Rita and gets close to fulfilling his desires, but she always ends up slapping him in the face. Phil gives up. He sinks into depression. Things don't look good for him. But gradually, he begins to take an interest in others. He realises his own mortality when he discovers an old familiar friend has died. Phil tries to save him, but he fails. It's at this point that he decides to do what he can to help others. He focuses on doing good deeds. A child falling out of a tree, he catches them, and he buys donuts for his co-workers. He changes the tyre on a car full of elderly women, and he even saves the mare from choking. He helps a young couple who are unsure about getting married affirm their love for each other. And one morning, he wakes up, and his world has finally changed. He's crossed over and escaped the time loop. He's earned Rita's affection, and he's the most beloved person in town. It's not clear how much time has elapsed. Weeks, months, even years. But it doesn't really matter, because that's not the point. It's not how much time you have, but what you do with it that counts. Life is a gift. This story is saying that to us. You can choose to use it selfishly for personal gain, or you can hold on to God's promise and plan for your life and use it to serve others in your own unique and special way. The choice is yours. On this seasonal pivot day, we turn not simply from cradle to cross, but from cradle through cross to the empty tomb already visible, albeit dimly through the darkness to come. Following Jesus is not just about Christmas, not just about Good Friday. Following Jesus is also about the hope and the freedom of Easter. It's about holding on to God's promise, which is no easy task. But thankfully, we're not on our own in this. Our church calendar offers us seasons in which one or the other piece takes primacy in our worship. And our own lives offer us seasons in which one or the other takes primacy in our faith and in our own experiences. Sometimes they match up, and sometimes they don't. In which case, our worship serves as such a valuable reminder to us that what we are living is not the whole of God's story. Simeon's song begins with a declaration of the end of his work, perhaps even the end of his life. Lord, now let your servant go in peace. His task has been fulfilled. He has borne witness to the arrival of the infant Messiah, seen the salvation of the world. That season is over. A new season has begun. I wonder how Simeon felt when he woke up the day after meeting Jesus and seeing the truth of what his future would hold. I wonder if he woke up thinking, today might be the day, before he remembered that yesterday had been the day and that he would have to find something else to do today. I'd like to think that perhaps he lit a candle and prayed that the light of the world would break through the darkness and reveal to him the continuation of God's promise. Let that be our prayer also, as we journey through the seasons of the year and of our lives. Amen.